So we have Pete Worden in the audience. Pete is the director of NASA Ames. And we thought you might be very interested in Pete's perspectives on Obama's announcement on the 15th about the privatization of the space economy.
Absolutely.
Pete?
You guys got gypped when I'm the surprise. and I have an unenviable job, I guess, for a government employee to say what the president really said was. But I think what the president said was really cool. And just to give you like a 1-minute discussion here is, I've been in the space program my whole career, as a lot of folks here have, and it was pretty clear after Apollo that we needed a next step in space. And in dozens, if not hundreds, of advisory panels and so on, some of which I sat on, that next step is to establish a permanent human settlement somewhere off-world. Whether it's the moon or Mars or an asteroid is obviously arguable, but that is our next step. And for the last few decades, we've been trying to do that using basically Apollo on steroids. I don't know where I heard that before. We can do that, but we needed a lot more money than we were going to get. So the point is to invent a new way to do it. And in a nutshell, to me, that new way has got two key areas. The first, and maybe the most important, is to do what America always does best, in turn getting what I'll call the trucking company to low Earth orbit, turn it over to the private sector. And we think we can save a lot of money there. Second is to have NASA do what we do best, and that's to do really cool new things. So that cool new thing, as far as I'm concerned, is building for the first time a true spaceship. Something that people can get into, and you don't have to argue whether you're going to the moon or Mars or an asteroid. It can take us there, and we think that technology is here. We think it can be developed in the next decade. Indeed, some of the plans will have us flying some of these things, small-scale models, in a few years. So I'm very excited about it, and we need the private sector. I think we will have settlements in other worlds when you can buy a ticket to go there, and it's the private sector is going to get us. So welcome aboard, and by the way, I'm available for big bucks consultancies after I retire. So. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete. On behalf of the Churchill Club, it's my privilege to introduce David Livingston. David is founder and host of the Space Show, which is a talk radio program focusing on space, commerce, and private space exploration. Since he started the show in 2001, 9 years ago, he has done a whopping 1,347 programs. Through this show and other related pursuits, David is convening people, airing new ideas, new opinions for a worldwide audience, which to me is important in and of itself. But think of it, he's also capturing for posterity these conversations as history is being made, which is truly an invaluable contribution. So I found out that his interest in space began in the first grade. He had his Cub telescope out there, checking out the craters in the moon, and could just barely see the rings around Saturn. And when he wasn't gazing upward, he was apparently often looking downward, reading Sky and Telescope magazine. Even through advanced education, he followed his passion for space. His doctoral dissertation in business administration was entitled Outer Space Commerce, Its History and Prospects. And he's here tonight to lead a conversation about the space economy today and tomorrow. Please give a very warm welcome to David Livingston.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's an honor to be here at the Churchill Club, and I appreciate all of you coming out. Let's get into who is here to my left on this great panel. So they're each going to introduce themselves. Peter?
My name is Peter Diamandis. I serve in a couple different relevant capacities as Chairman and CEO of the X Prize, co-founder, managing director of Space Adventures /Zero G, and the Chairman and Vice Chancellor of Singularity University.
I'm Bill Gregory, former NASA astronaut. The words founder and CEO are nowhere to be found on my resume. And I can assure you that if I won the Powerball today, I still wouldn't come close to the entrepreneurial and financial statements that the rest of these guys have. So I'm not here from an investment point of view or a business development point of view. I'm here sort of to throw in the actual having the experience of flown in space and grown up through both the military and also through the NASA program.
I'm Naveen Jain. I'm founder and CEO of Intelius. Before that, I was a founder and CEO of InfoSpace. And I work with Peter on some of the X Prize stuff and looking at some of the space commerce about, we know the next frontier is space, and we're trying to figure out what are the different things we could do to make sure that they can be commercial success.
And I'm Bob Richards. I'm the founder and CEO of Odyssey Moon Limited. We are competing for the Google Lunar X Prize with the X Prize Foundation, building a business model for a transportation service to the moon. Prior to that, I was a co-founder of the International Space University with Peter, and worked on a couple of flight programs, including reaching the planet Mars with a robotic spacecraft together with NASA was nice enough to put a lander under my instrument, and we flew to Mars together. And really a passionate believer and advocate of professional and personal and commercial space in partnership with the new NASA that we see emerging, which I think is a really grand future for all of us.
Thank you. I know many of you that are here, but I don't know a lot of you. So if you'll bear with us for about 2 minutes or 3 minutes, I'd like to turn to NASA here on my left. And I'd like to put into context some of what you will likely hear tonight, because I'm not sure that everybody really understands what's involved in going to space, what we mean, orbital versus suborbital, the type of energies we're talking about, why a rocket is so dramatically different than an airplane, a jet airplane. So, Bill, sure. Can you do a like 101 real quick over at the graduate school level for our audience?
I'll give a quick thumbnail sketch. There's a tremendous difference between launching, going straight up, barely reaching 70 miles above the surface of the Earth, seeing the sky go dark, seeing the curvature, and then coming straight back down and landing. To get to orbit and reach 17,500 miles an hour, which is orbital velocity, or 25,000 feet a second, 5 miles a second approximately, it takes just a tremendous amount of energy. And the shuttle, as it sits on the pad, weighs a little over 4 million pounds. And the shuttle itself is actually the whole unit. It comprises the orbiter, which is the part that orbits the Earth and comes back and lands. Most people call it the shuttle. It's actually the orbiter. The external tank, the 2 boosters, that entire mix, the orbiter, which orbits the Earth and comes back, only weighs about 250,000 pounds, usually less than 250,000, depends on the payload. So what you have to grasp is this: 1/16 of the weight of the shuttle sitting on the pad is the orbiter and the payload. 15/16 is fuel and a little bit of structure to hold the fuel. So it takes just an unbelievable amount of energy to get to orbit in 8.5 minutes. And the tougher part of the equation is you have to dissipate all that energy coming back down. So that's one of the really tricky parts, is getting rid of all that energy that you put in very quickly. And when we slow down for our deorbit burn, we actually only slow down about 3%, plus or minus, over the Indian Ocean. So 97% of the energy and the speed is dissipated through heat and different maneuvers during the reentry. So I just wanted to kind of put that in context so that you have a good feel for what it's going to take technology-wise and physics-wise to get up to, say, the space station, let alone get to an asteroid or the moon or Mars.
What speeds are you reaching when you get to orbit?
Again, about 17,500 miles an hour, and you have to do a circularization burn, otherwise you come back down. But it's very speed critical. A few hundred feet per second is the difference between sinking and swimming.
Okay. Also, to put it into context, you're going to hear a lot about budgets and money and what we can afford and what we can't afford, because I'm sure we'll be talking about the administration's policy program and fiscal year 2011 budget. So to put things in context, the 2005 NASA budget was about $16.2 billion. And you'll laugh at this, but the global potato chip market in 2005 was $16.8 billion. And the global junk food market was $48 billion, almost 3 times what we spend on space. And we do a hell of a lot, and have done a hell of a lot with what we do on NASA's budget and how it has benefited humanity, not just the United States and wealthy countries, but all sorts of countries. So those are some comparisons, and we can start off, and let's just start off with the President's plan for fiscal year 2011, which is the budget. Peter, you want to summarize it, and then can you do a good summary and what we're talking about, and then we'll start in with questions at that point.
Sure. It follows on the words of Dr. Worden. So the President, in coordination with the senior staff at NASA headquarters, put forward a budget with $6 billion of more spending than planned over the next 5 years to buy commercial products and services and do more research and development. So as Pete said, our plan, Constellation plan for going back to the moon, when it was analyzed by
Augustine.
Thank you. By Augustine, said we don't have enough money in the budget to actually pull it off. The problem with space programs are that if you have 99% of the money to get there, it means you don't get there, right? You can't make it 99% of the way to orbit. If you miss by a few hundred feet per second, you come back down. So a NASA program of going to the moon that doesn't have enough money, gets 90% of the money required to get there, ends up eventually being canceled. And the challenge that Augustine said is we can't actually pull it off with a budget that's allocated. And all the other problems go on Earth, can we support it? So he said, let's in fact invest in, and it's the most logical thing I've ever heard from NASA in the last 20 years, let's fundamentally invest in commercial programs, fundamental R&D, that can bring the cost of getting to space down. Because with all due respect to the beautiful vehicle you flew on, at $1 billion a flight, with 6 or 7 people on board, that's over $100 million a seat. It's extraordinarily expensive. To put a number in perspective, if you do the theoretical calculations of the amount of energy it takes to put you and your spacesuit into orbit, we heard a little bit about 15/16 being fuel. Well, you can all do the high school experiment of mgh, potential energy, and then 1/2 mv squared to go into orbit. It's about 5.6 gigajoules of energy. If you bought it off the electric grid over here, at 7 cents a kilowatt hour, the amount of dollars it would take to put you and your spacesuit into orbit, it's about $100. So it's the level of inefficiencies we have in the current rocket technologies are extraordinary. We are still using in the rockets today the same technology that we used in Chinese rocketry 1,000 years ago. They're just far bigger. You burn something in a tube and hot gases come out the other end. So the question is, we need to change the equation. We need to make things more efficient. And that's what the new budget is, investment in R&D and commercial opportunities.
Okay, so
You know where I stand.
Yes, anyone on the panel can go for this, or you all can go for this. We want to shift to private. So first of all, as far as I know, all aerospace companies are private. There are no publicly owned aerospace companies. So
you mean government owned?
Government owned, correct. I mean, they are public in the sense that you can buy stock in them other than for SpaceX. And you have one customer, at least for the foreseeable future, which is the government. Are we really talking privatization when you have one customer, which is the government? Who wants to handle that one?
I'll give a shot at that. I've been involved in both sides of the coin.
Yes.
It was a great privilege to be involved in a NASA mission, in a NASA program that got one of my childhood dreams into reality, which was to reach Mars. But it was also very frustrating. I was a small partner in a very large program with a commercial technology that at retail value that we sold on Earth, we sold about $30,000.
What was the technology, Bob?
Oh, sorry. It's laser radar, LiDAR. So it's using laser systems to detect ranges and detect elements. So a company in Canada called Optech is really a global leader in this LiDAR technology and was selected to go on this mission to Mars. And we sell this technology.
Give us the name of the mission. They won't know.
Phoenix.
Phoenix mission.
The Phoenix mission. It was the first soft lander mission to Mars since the 70s, landed on the North Pole of Mars. A brilliant mission, and by some measures, a very efficient mission as far as cost goes, about $300 and $400 million. But the technology that we had developed, that we sold regularly to the U.S. Army, for instance, at $30,000 a pop, by the time it went through the requirements that were imposed on it through the prime contractors, which were responsible to the Canadian Space Agency, which was responsible to NASA, it turned into a $30 million device, a little barnacle attached to this spacecraft that was going to Mars. So that it was that same inverse cost performance from 30,000 to 30 million, which really matches your measure as well, Peter, from 100 million down to $100. So it's not so much that we're not dealing with smart people. It's the requirements imposed. And if you have an entrepreneurial commercial company that can take the risks and have tolerance for failure, whereas many government missions don't have the tolerance for failure, or even large corporations don't have the tolerance for failure. Small companies do have that tolerance, can take some more risks, and we can do things much more cost effectively that way.
Anybody else? Can you sell to the government and still be considered a private operation?
Absolutely. I mean, there are many, many private companies whose sole business is to sell to the government. I mean, the very large defense companies who make lots and lots of money selling it to the government, even though it costs almost 100 times as much for the same parts that you could sell in a commercial space to sell. In fact, I was in a Pentagon a couple of years ago, and we were looking at the computer system that actually have a communication between US and Russia. And these communication systems were running on 386. And now you wonder what is going on. And I asked them, why can't you guys be using the latest system? He said it took them 5 years to approve that hardware. And then when it was approved, which was 386 was what was approved, to find even the 386 chip by the time was impossible. Right. Right. And it cost them more money to get that 386 system that could have bought the latest state-of-the-art system, 10 times more. So I think the fact is that just the fact it's selling to government, it may be inefficient, but the companies do that.
There's another element here. Sorry, Greg. There's another element that when you do work for a government program, they do dictate the margins that you can charge. So it's not a free market relationship at all, really. They say you're allowed this much of profit. That's it. We'll allow you that. And you really are selling your labor at a very small margin. So it's a different model than you would have if you had a free market demand.
But just to add to that, one of the CEO was with me at that time, and I asked him, how do you sleep at night charging the government $50,000 for this computer? And he said, if you spend 5 years and 10 people constantly living and lobbying everything, by the time you get done with it, the $50,000, you barely make any money.
So the potential is to actually change the model right now. Right now, what happens is the government buys the vehicles and operates them themselves, or they subcontract the operations, versus the government, next time Bill wants to fly, being able to buy a commercial seat at a fixed price. So ultimately, right now, one of the companies I co-founded, Space Adventures, buys seats from the Russians. We can't buy seats from the US, so we buy seats from the Russians on a Soyuz, and we resell them. We've sold 8 customers right now. The price went from $20 to $45 million, but we can buy, from capitalist Russia, a commercial seat and resell it.
Did you want to say something, Bill?
Yeah, there are a few issues, when it comes to the dollars and cents and the price tag on the missions for the shuttle. I mean, the numbers I've always heard was 200, maybe 300 million. And again, it depends on how much of the infrastructure you roll into it. But the big problem with the older technology is the fact that it does take so long to develop it. It does take so long to make it proven. And once it is proven, NASA is tremendously reluctant to change things because once they have something that works, and of course they don't go to the extreme of the Russians, where they're still launching cannonballs into space. But the bottom line is that they are very conservative. Those 5 GPC computers that fly the space shuttle, your laptop, possibly your BlackBerry, but certainly your laptop has much more computing power than they do. However, those 5 computers operate in sync every single step. And so what you give up for a tremendous increase in capability, instead what you're looking for is reliability and that human-rated moniker, which is a big deal. And that's the one thing that really costs money, is trying to make it much more reliable and much more safe.
We'll get into safety in just a minute, but I want to talk about the way things are contracted for. So today, NASA will go to all these private companies, Boeing, Lockheed, ATK, and they design the rocket in conjunction with them, and they buy it, and it is a NASA-owned rocket. And in the new model, they will go to a different division of Boeing and Lockheed and SpaceX and Orbital and maybe Sierra Nevada. These are all companies, contending with various versions of rockets. And they will buy a seat, but that company, correct me if I'm wrong, can then turn around and also market those seats and those rockets for other markets and other purposes. You won't have to go to Russia, for example, to buy a seat on a rocket. You can possibly buy a seat on a SpaceX rocket. Big difference. Anyone commenting on that?
Sure.
Bob?
Well, we're trying a new model together with NASA, Odyssey Moon, a small company that wants to build a robotic spacecraft to go to the moon, to do business and to win a prize. And to do so, we've actually partnered with NASA. We found a very friendly, innovative center that believed in us and in our capability to really maybe pull this off with a little bit of help. And so we were able to, through a mechanism that really only NASA has, called a Space Act Agreement, partner with NASA, hire NASA to help us, really. And we can, instead of responding to the requirements like I did on that government mission to Mars, I can say, these are the pieces that I really need because I think I can do the other things myself or hire in other talent. And I can pick and choose to do that. And by doing so, I can pick the best of what NASA has in the vast experience and return to NASA. There's a value proposition here that actually is maybe counterintuitive. Return to NASA the innovation that they might not have been able to do themselves. This private-public partnership. So it's a model that we're trying. Time will tell, but it's a model that AIM stepped up and said we'll do this, and now the rest of NASA is taking a really close look at it.
But David, this is a great idea to use the private partnerships, obviously, because they're great entrepreneurs who can do wonderful things at a cost that is not possible in a government. But really the question comes down to is, let's assume the first flight that NASA uses and it somehow has an accident, would public ever allow, for government to ever use a private thing, thinking these capitalists will always put the profit ahead of the safety? And today, whether we look at the large banks where people believe that these large banks or the large Wall Street firms put profit ahead of the goodness, and would the private companies do the same and really try to make the profit as the motive rather than the safety?
Well, let's turn to safety, but Boeing, Lockheed, let's see, Boeing is Delta IV, for those of you that may know a little bit about rockets. Lockheed is Atlas V. ATK is the solid rocket boosters and is Ares 1, unless it's canceled. The rockets that we have today, including the Atlas and the Delta, which also fly high priority military defense and COMSATs for the commercial industry, are prioritized for reliability, and they are prioritized for for making sure that the things work efficiently. They're not, in safety, they're not really prioritized for financial or economics. That is way down on how we deal with rockets. Now we're shifting, and you're going to turn this over to the private sector per se, and by definition, the private sector has to prioritize to be profitable. Otherwise, you might as well just be an extension of the government if you're not out there trying to make a profit. So it is a fundamental shift to prioritize for being profitable. So you hear a lot of criticism that private sector can't do this safety-wise. So let's talk about safety and how these rockets are prioritized, and can the private sector prioritize for reliability and for safety and for cost effectiveness? Who wants to give a stab at that?
I just got to throw something out. You're making me chuckle because the running joke in the astronaut office is you're walking out to the shuttle, you're walking out to the vehicle that was produced by the lowest bidder. So money's always been a factor. It's just that over time it becomes the established civilian program versus everybody competing.
Who wants to talk about safety and
So I'll
to the
jump
private
in.
sector? Yeah.
So I have zero doubt that the private sector can optimize for both. I think the fact of the matter is, first and foremost, they're going to have to meet a certain specs provided by NASA for safety, period. You either meet them or you don't. There are very strict specifications on what a man-rated, excuse me for the women in the audience, but it's called a man-rated vehicle, can or cannot do. And then the question is, on top of that, can you develop it and operate it at a lower cost? Each of us fly in airplanes that meet FAA specifications, and we have extraordinary levels of safety. And all of us buy commercial computers that work extraordinarily well in the Winnipeg winter or the Texas summers. So commercial industry can actually provide. The difficulty is that today we only fly. How many shuttle flights were there in the last couple of years? In a great year, we'll do 6 shuttle flights.
Yeah, 6, 7.
In a bad year, we'll do 2 or 3 shuttle flights. So we operate a vehicle 3 times a year. 6. That's not a marketplace. The nice thing is when we get to commercial rates where we're flying dozens or hundreds or thousands of times per year, that's when you start getting reliability by virtue of flying often and learning from those experiences. The reason a shuttle operates the Southwest operates 737 so efficiently is we fly it a lot and we learn.
The orbiter, we were supposed to fly more than one a month. We were supposed to
50 times a year was the original.
Yeah, originally
spec.
you're talking
50.
Close to one a week. And so obviously the expectations were not met, and that would have, of course, driven the cost down. A good example of the human-rated, and that changed during the Clinton regime, by the way. It went from manned spaceflight to human spaceflight officially. But one thing I want to point out is those computers that we have on the orbiter, they work flawlessly, or very close to it. The laptops that we flew, those things would hiccup several times every day because they're not space rated. And so that's where the differentiation is. That laptop computer that I was using, cutting edge technology, slick as far as everything that it would do, but it wouldn't stand up to the radiation of low Earth orbit. We're not talking about going to the moon. We're not talking about going to Mars. And so therein lies the problem, and therein lies the challenge. And I'm not saying the commercial side can't do it, because that's who's been doing it. I mean, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, these are all commercial companies. They operate aircraft, but space is a little bit different. And so it's just a bigger challenge. It's an opportunity to excel.
Maybe we could take a look at the public reaction to disasters in space, and that might give us some insight into when something disastrous happens in space. Those of us who were around when Challenger exploded on launch, or when Columbia on return, these are things that emotionally impact us. It shuts down the entire program. We don't shut down the airlines when there's an aviation disaster. We don't not get in our car the next day when there's an accident on the highway. But when something happens in space, we shut it down, and we say, oh my gosh. And so if we think about that, why does that happen? Well, part of it is that all of us are so emotionally bound to this heroics. We relate to this. And so this is a terrible tragedy to us personally. And our political leaders who respond to the people in Congress, this is something that just can't happen. You can't have this type of public. So there's a whole downplay. There's a whole down pressure to not take those risks.
Well, I think partly, Bob, is that the reason the space flights people get emotional is over the 5 years, if you only fly 30 times and one of them crash, that's a very high percentage. Right. So in fact, if every 1 out of every 30 planes you flew crashed, we would have the same reaction, right?
That's right. I wouldn't be getting on that plane. That's right. Good point.
Right. So I think it's just a matter of probabilities of how many times.
So that's supporting Peter's point.
There's emotional ties. I mean, the basics, if you look at an aircraft carrier and the space shuttle, around $4 billion, they're about the same price. If you lost a Navy aircraft carrier and lost the lives of 7 people, it would be a positive miracle because there's so many people on board. But because you're losing everybody, because it's a very high visibility situation, you're not looking at the $4 billion asset, you're looking at the 7 lives.
Well, I think that fundamentally we have to come up with a new technology. If you use this identical technology and you say you want to make it as safe as NASA is doing, you try to do exactly the same thing what they're doing, you can't really reduce the cost just by you changing from government to that. The only way you can make it a successful private enterprise is to coming up with a totally different technology. So as opposed to using the fossil fuel that is 15/16 of weight, can you really come up with a different fuel, maybe nuclear fuel, that are nuclear fuel rockets? So they're really light, so you don't have to take 16 times as much weight. You can only take a tiny bit more than the actual weight and really go up in there. So you really have to fundamentally rethink the way we do things. And in that sense, the entrepreneurs and the private enterprises are very, very good to find out the new ways of doing things. But we can't continue to imagine that just because private industry is doing it, doing exactly the same thing, the same safety record, it will be substantially cheaper. It's just not possible.
Peter?
So Karen introduced me, and I mentioned myself that I serve as chairman of Singularity University. And hopefully, many of you know what that is. It's a university that we started here in Silicon Valley, partnered with a number of companies. It's based at NASA Ames at Pete's facility. And the premise is that there are a number of technologies that are in rapid exponential growth that are basically fundamentally changing the world. And these technologies, AI, robotics, nanotech, bioinformatics, computers and network systems, human-machine interface, nanomaterials and such, are technologies that are changing at such a rapid, fast rate that they have the potential to address the things that Naveen said. And I've been a passionate space cadet since my childhood. And the thing that's most important in my life right now is the growth in this university, because it has the potential to transform space. It has the potential to do things radically different. And unfortunately, it's also, the rate of change is an anathema to large corporations and governments. Because large corporations and governments don't have the ability to try things moving at that rapid rate of change because it's taking a big risk. And if you take a big risk, then if you have a high probability of failing, then there's a stock hit or congressional investigation. In the entrepreneurial world, especially in computers, the premise is fail often, fail early. Because if you fail rapidly, then you can experiment and try things and find out what works. Unfortunately, you've got the failure is not an option concept as well going in the space program, and there's a dissonance there. So how do we encourage rapid failure, rapid iteration, not with human life, but with subsystems, robots, the stuff that's going on Google Lunar X Prize, so that's what I think we absolutely need to change things in space and bring the cost down dramatically.
Go ahead, and then I want to take us
I just had one thing, because we're talking about change. I do want to point one thing out. Constellation actually was a major change. If you look at the history of human space, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Space Shuttle, Space Station, every one of those programs was run by the company that is now engulfed by Boeing, okay? So when they had Constellation, when they competed Orion, most people did not think that Lockheed Martin had a chance because they were commercial space. They really didn't have a human space presence. Oh, I left one thing out. I left out the lunar module, but that was Grumman, and Northrop Grumman was teamed with Boeing. So the one team had the entire history of human space of experience on that team. And yet, the Lockheed team was selected. And one of the reasons, and I was tied to this because I was at Honeywell, one of the reasons is because Honeywell Avionics was going to use avionics that are used today in Boeing aircraft in the 777 and then the follow-on 787. So instead of using a bunch of research and development money in an attempt to speed things up and make them more reliable and going commercial, what the Lockheed team did was say, okay, we're going to take millions of hours worth of experience in these avionics, we're going to put them in the spacecraft instead of developing a new technology and sending that out to the aviation world. So there was a change, and I mean, a solid rocket booster as your main stage for Ares 1, we've never done that before. Bottom line is that we used 2 boosters on the space shuttle, but only for 2 minutes and 5 seconds of every flight. Flight lasts 17 days, ATKs involved for 2 minutes and 5 seconds. And I would say that if we hadn't lost Challenger, people wouldn't know Thiokol any more than they know Aerojet that does the OMS engine, that does the deorbit burn. So it's a case of, I think, Constellation, specifically Orion, was a step in the right direction. But for many, it's not a quick enough step. And unfortunately, NASA is somewhat of a dinosaur. It's difficult to move. And I believe that most of the folks up here would like to see quicker move. And so that's where their challenge is. Their challenge is getting NASA to respond quicker. Not that they don't respond, but it's just a very slow, painful process.
Let me take us in a shift of direction. Gentlemen, we're in, I'm going to say, sort of a weird investment market in the United States and possibly globally. Many of us who are younger have not gone through what we're going through now, and many of us my age, this is about as intense as it's been, although there were some other rough times before. But we're looking at regulatory changes. We're looking at capital attraction. You know, how do you acquire capital changes? What kind of risk will the government allow or not allow? And we're looking at a regulatory environment that may or may not impact what we do in commercial space. There's just a lot of unknowns. So starting with you, Naveen, how do you do due diligence to consider a commercial space investment? And if hardware is involved, let's say you're looking at a company making a rocket, for example, do you do a separate set of engineering due diligence to get an aerospace engineer or someone familiar with the hardware to say, yeah, that vehicle can meet those parameters that the operator is talking about, or no, not with that fuel or not with that nozzle or whatever? How do you do those levels of due diligence in today's world?
Well, actually, as a part of the investment, it's like investing in biotech. You rarely can do a due diligence on what doesn't exist or what is a potential. As Peter talked about, these are the things that are exponentially growing. We can't really do a due diligence on something that doesn't exist. So from my perspective, almost any investment, you invest in people. You invest in bright people who know what they're doing, and you know they're going to be able to get there before anybody else gets there. So it may not exist today, but you know you find bright people and you back them up. And that's what you would do in space. That's what you do in biotech. You find the brightest scientists and you put them in saying, can you solve cancer? You can't do due diligence. How do you solve cancer?
Anybody else want to comment on that question or this line, Bob?
Well, I guess being on the other side of the coin, the responsibility is on the entrepreneurial company as well to do as much diligence as possible by the time we go to a market to say that, we've really thought about this, and it's not just a better mousetrap, but we're thinking about something differently. It's outside the box. We've looked at the markets, and here's what we believe, and we're counting on, we've got a disruptive technology. We've got something that really, really is cool. And there's a sea change of some kind in the market that we see is happening. So there is Odyssey Moon has spent a couple of years and quite a bit of money doing a lot of the background work, so we would be prepared to answer the questions. But it does come down to the people. So it really comes down to pulling together the right entrepreneurial team that will impress the people that we can actually pull it off.
So two things are happening right now. Again, the exponential technologies I spoke about earlier are empowering small teams to do incredible things. As a reference example, the X-15 that flew in the late 50s and early 60s, in today's dollars was about a $1.4 billion program. Spaceship One, that won the Ansari X Prize in 2004, which had 3 times the capacity of the X-15, was done for $26 million with a 25-person program. Okay, and what was the difference was technology, not smarter people. So a program only doable by governments is now doing by a small team of graduate students. We are starting to see venture funds for the first time starting to invest in entrepreneurial companies. Not mentioning names, but SpaceX, for example, had 2 Silicon Valley firms invest in it for the first time. Other thing going on is that you have somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 billionaires on the planet who grew up during the Apollo era, now in their 40s and 50s, who are saying, I want to make those dreams I grew up with true, and I'm going to start investing my own capital or investing in people. And then finally, there's a realization that everything we hold of value on this planet, metals, minerals, energy, real estate, the things that governments fight wars over are in infinite quantities in space. And there are today entrepreneurs, groups of people thinking about how I'm going to go and capture those resources and bring them back. And I say this without any question, the first trillionaires will be made as we open up the space frontier.
I think what Peter is saying is really what space commercialization is all about. I think most of us think of space commercialization as a tourism for rich. This is how the rich people can go up there and see and have a wonderful vacation. And really think the real commercialization will happen when we solve the problem of humanity by going up in the space, whether it happens to be cooling down the planet, reducing the amount of sun coming through, finding more minerals at a cheaper price that we could ever mine here, whether it happens to be platinum or whether it happens to be a rare metals, you'll be able to find them in most of these asteroids or planets, lot more quantity, lot easier to bring them down. So I think the fundamental issue really comes down to is, are these two different things? I think one of the gentlemen I was talking to before this, he said there are so many problems of humanity right on this earth. Why are we talking about space? Why are we spending so much brain cycles and money in space? Well, the fact is they are not disconnected. You can solve the problem of humanity on this planet by being on other planet, whether, as Peter said, finding new space to live so you don't have to fight over it. Finding more source of energy so you don't have to go to Iraq to find that oil anymore, right? You could have the mirrors up in the sky that could direct the energy even in Seattle, so you could get a lot of sun in Seattle and really actually get the solar energy there.
You made him drop his crackberry. Look at that.
Well, Naveen's really hit. I mean, this is absolutely what it's about. It's about the perspective that we get and the ability we have through commercial activities together with governments to bring the benefits of space back to Earth. When I haven't gone to space yet, but I'm going to. I just know I am. I look for that privilege. But when I go out to space, I'm not going to be looking out. I'm going to be looking back. I want to see my world. No matter how far I am away from the planet Earth, I'm going to want, where's Earth? Oh, yeah, that's it. And I'm going to be thinking about how precious that world is. And it's only by, I was privileged to be able to be taught by Carl Sagan. If some of you know that, I became the special assistant to Carl back at Cornell when he was actually looking into comparative planetology. And it's by looking at other worlds and understanding other worlds that we understand our Earth a lot better. It was through, we arrived at Mars, to Mars once with an orbiter and found all the scientists were disappointed because there was this global dust storm. You couldn't see a bloody thing. It was all covered. But as the dust dissipated, and you could measure and see the difference and what the dynamics of the atmosphere, scientists started thinking about, well, what happens on planet Earth? It led to the idea of a nuclear winter and, so it's by looking at other worlds that we absolutely get a much broader capacity to understand our planet Earth and help affect change here.
See, what I think the biggest advantage for commercial entities is they are not saddled by the mindset, the financial mindset of the government. The way the government operates is budget minimization. They get a fixed pot of money And that's all they have. And they have to do whatever they can to stretch it as far as they can.
I think it's distributed around 50 states is what they have to
Well,
do.
they kind of do the peanut butter thing, that's true. But in industry, profit motive is what drives you. And you know that if you spend a little bit more money, but you get a much bigger buck, that's easy to sell, and that's where all of these folks have had their success, which I admire from a great distance, mind you. But the bottom line is that if you take a satellite, a highly expensive satellite, and launch it into low Earth orbit, you've increased its value, but not a great deal. If you take a bunch of liquid hydrogen, fuel that's needed on orbit, and put that into orbit, the value of that fuel has climbed tremendously. So there are very important and very lucrative opportunities for commercial industry. And because they're not saddled by a fixed budget, you know, and if you look at the NASA budget, with the exception of just a couple years of Apollo, it's been less than 1% for the entire 50 years of NASA.
Okay, I want to take us in another direction because we're marching toward the Q&A time. Last week, a poll came out. I think it was by the Everett Corporation. I don't know how many of you saw it. And it polled the general public about space. So 52% of the people said that the reason we should go to space is for what is called planetary protection, protecting Earth against an incoming meteorite or asteroid or something of that nature. 48% said we should do space to learn more about protecting the Earth's environment, whether it's climate change or something else. Nothing else registered. 22% of the American people knew that the president had put out a new policy suggestion. That's it, 22%. So in the few minutes that we have before we go to Q&A, let's connect the potential in the future of commercial space to us individually. Let's ask what commercial space can do for each of us. Now, I know because my son, who has cystic fibrosis, is alive and well because of space technology at UCSF 7 and 8 years ago. He would not have gotten through some problems without space technology in the intensive care unit. I have lived that, and I know others that have lived that, but people in the public don't know that space has come into the emergency room in the intensive care unit. And the doctors and the nurses don't tell, you know, the patients that, oh, we're using space technology here. I just happen to recognize it. So connect us here. You know, 22% is all that knows that there's even a new space policy on the table being considered. What's in it for each of us?
Well, healthcare, I think you mentioned, is interesting. I think not only the technology that is developed for space can be used for medical, but I really believe if you think about the vaccines or think about what you can do for research up in the space, because of zero gravity, how the crystals are formed, how the atoms are crystallized, they're very, very different. In some sense, the type of science you're trying to do on Earth, sometimes it's just very, very difficult the way things are crystallized here, versus when you do them in space, you can come up with different compounds, different vaccines that could fundamentally change the healthcare in this country.
Well,
Or the world for that.
I get really upset when we try and rationalize space based upon products and services and so forth, and you can talk about GPS and weather satellites and all of this stuff. Here's the biggest issue. At the end of the day, if the human race is surviving, if we're going forward, thousands of years from now, we're going to look back at these next few decades as that moment in time when the human race moved off the planet to the stars. It's either going to happen now or something's really screwed up and we've set back a long way. And when we do that, I want you to think about the fact that the language, the culture, the laws, the rules and regulations that will be the lingua franca, and I use that as a pun here, for humanity going out to the cosmos will be set. It will either be that the majority of the cosmos starts speaking Mandarin, or Hindu, or English. The fact that the majority of the scientific and technological world today speaks English and uses, you know, a majority American technology is because British were an exploring nation. That's a fundamental issue. So the question is America going to stand firm and open up the space frontier or stand back? Because the decision, the choice, isn't happening 100 years from now. It's happening these next 2 decades. And remember the fact that Bill said about 15/16 of the cost of a rocket being fuel? That's true. By mass, not by cost.
Wait.
How much of a vehicle is cost for fuel? About 1%. 90% of the cost of a vehicle is labor. And you know what's the cheapest labor rates out there to build rockets? It's not America.
Really?
It's the Chinese today and the Indians tomorrow. So China and India will decimate us in space in the next few decades, fundamentally decimate us, unless we make some fundamental technological changes. That's the only thing that matters right now.
Well, who would have thought in the early 70s, a half a century later, we haven't left low Earth orbit? Half a century by the time we would be able to get to the moon again.
My friendly Americans, how many in the audience are not actually from the United States?
How many live here?
Well, so my point, not to, I mean, absolutely, Peter.
And I'm
But
putting
my-
on a nationalistic hat for the moment, talking
that's
about
fine.
the president's
That's
budget.
fine. And we deal with it at the International Space University. This is what we think about all the time. We are going to space as a species. And yes, you can play the national flag. If you guys, I'm from Canada. I'm really, really happy here in Mountain View. But if you're not going to help me do it, I'm going elsewhere because I want to partner with the people who will get us off this planet. And Peter's absolutely right. We're at the precipice of one of the most incredible adventures. We'll look back throughout all of the future history of humanity at this epoch and say that this was the time. As fundamental as when the aquatic creatures crawled out onto the beaches, you know, we are transitioning into a spacefaring species. We are Homo spacians, about to...
Well,
He's
so,
killing it.
well, let me go a little bit deeper because Peter is exactly right. But we're not communicating what Peter has just so eloquently and effectively communicated to this audience with the general public. So the question is, do we really care? Does the general public need to be involved?
No,
What percentage?
They don't care. Of course not. It isn't. You know, except for a few jobs. No, the public doesn't care, which is unfortunate because the time horizon and the immediate effects are incongruous with their lives.
So you would blow off trying to communicate space to the American people?
No, it's why I'm focused on trying to build commercial companies to do this, because the biggest profit potentials will drive us in the right direction.
So Peter, I'm going to get on the same soapbox as he got into. This country, the foundation of this country is built by immigrants. People who came to this country because we were able to attract the best and the brightest from around the world. We welcomed them with open arms, and it didn't matter whether they spoke English or not, as long as they were bright and
That's
their
how my
brains were
parents
bright.
came.
Right? My point is,
all
it's
of us
not about the
probably.
language, whether they speak English or the person next to me couldn't speak a proper English. We all were here because this was a land of opportunity, right? So the fact is, what we need to do is not only create a land, continue to be a land of opportunity, not a land of nationalistic, English-speaking people.
I agree with you. I mean, I obviously made my point
I understand.
to be extreme, but
I have one question. I think we have time for this. I don't know how many in the audience know, but you're really, with this panel, among people who are amazing visionaries. So this is an issue I explore all the time on the Space Show. And Peter is probably at the top of any list I've ever come up with.
Absolutely.
You know, there are lots of visionaries, and in the space cadet world, honest-to-God visionaries are a dime a dozen. What makes Peter different and Bob different, and I don't know Naveen and Bill as well, what makes them different is they have a vision, they develop a strategy, they have figured out how to implement, how to have an action plan, and how to follow it up to fruition. How do you do it, Peter?
How do you do it, Peter?
you want this in 10 seconds or less?
Yes.
No, you've got 2 minutes.
So I think what, for example, Bob and I had with International Space University and replicate now with Singularity University is you have a bold vision. That's, having the bold vision is important to empower you. And then you have definable incremental steps to getting there. And it's really a matter of focusing on those. Of course, Naveen will tell you as an investor and a benefactor, one of our benefactors at X Prize, you back people. So really what we've done over the years is pulled in the team of people that you've worked with over the years that you know you can execute with to go and execute for that. It's fundamental, we've done it in space where, Salim and Rob and many others here in the audience have done it in their industries. So it's just executing with good practice. I think the thing that we have in the space world is, I would use a four-letter expletive, but I'm not going to do that, a lot of additional patience. And you have to have a commitment and a refusal to give up. Getting 0G, the company we do with parabolic flight, it took me 11 years to get through the FAA process. X Prize took 8 years to get it capitalized and operational. These things are extraordinarily difficult to do. So it's don't give up.
Bob?
Yeah, space is really hard, but it's probably not that much harder than anything that you choose to do passionately in your life. It just takes that much more energy to get there. So, to paraphrase Peter, if you're going to choose something that you're going to do with your life, then choose something you really love. And it's definitely embracing the vitality and the enthusiasm of the youth and never to give that up, right? And when you're in your 20s, you can be cute and enthusiastic, and everybody wants to help you. So the trick is, how do you keep that enthusiasm and that energy, that people still want to help you, and surrounding it.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
David, as an entrepreneur, these are exactly the same thing that Peter and Bob talk about. It starts with a passion, right? And you say you have to have a focus. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not only having a bold vision, you have to have execution. You just have to go out and do it. So you have to be persistent. You have to continue to stay flexible to make sure you are able to adapt as you're learning on the ground. And it's one of those type of things. As an entrepreneur, you do exactly the same thing that Peter and Bob do. Come up with you got to be absolutely passionate about it. You wake up in the morning, day in, day out, you think about it. It has to be in your DNA. It becomes part of your bloodstream.
And you choose the people you're going to work with
Absolutely.
for the rest of your life very carefully, because this guy has helped me. Every time I've been down, he's picked me up. And maybe there's a few times that I've picked him up too. Yep. But the idea of the International Space University and Singularity University is to bring together the people who will have the common belief system, that really believe the same thing. And that's so important, to know that there are so many people out there that are really sharing and are going to pull with you. But it's never giving up, and never allow the person who you care about to give up either.
That's right.
Bill,
Great team.
You don't get there working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And that was true during Apollo, and people were working around the clock. And it does take that passion, but it isn't all inspiration. There's a lot of perspiration involved as well.
Did you go through a similar process in your vision to become an astronaut?
Definitely. Going through test pilot school is kind of like going through pilot training and getting a master's degree. And there were times that for an hour or two of free time, you'd slit your grandmother's throat. And it was just a very high pressure, go kind of thing. So the bottom line is that.
Did you know this about your brother?
Yeah. But it takes a tremendous amount of effort, and finding the right people, which is what a common thread you've heard over and over. Finding the right people who are willing to devote their lives, not necessarily with any promise of financial success. That's the tough thing, is finding those special people who are, in some cases work around the clock, in other cases willing to risk their lives for the cause.
I wanted to slit my academic advisors in my dissertation's throat 5 times a day for 9 months.
I don't think that was the same point.
Where do each of you see commercial space and space development in 5 years? And then we'll go to Q&A. Peter.
So I'm hoping in the United States we'll have at least 2 or 3 commercial orbital providers in 5 years' time. I think we'll see hopefully the Google Lunar X Prize one in 5 years, which means we'll have commercial service for scientific payloads to the moon. Good luck, Bob, on that.
Thank you, Peter.
I think we'll see the first commercial asteroid missions going out there to try and claim some of these trillion-dollar rocks. And I think we'll see the cost of a seat. So on orbital flights, right now we charge $45 million to go on the Soyuz. Anybody interested, please see me afterwards. I think that price will come back down below 20. And I think we will see the cost of suborbital flights on Virgin Galactic's about $200,000 a seat now. I think we'll see that price drop below $100K. And hopefully, in 5 years' time, we'll have the first at least 1,000 seats flown off in suborbital flight.
Okay, Bill?
I'm going to pick one specific technology, nuclear power. People get scared of nuclear power. We have great difficulties putting nuclear generators to produce energy on spacecraft. Well, I think the United States is going to come around. You know, we basically haven't started a new nuclear power plant since 3 Mile Island. And the bottom line is, how many people have been killed at a nuclear power plant in the United States of America? 0. How many Navy personnel have been killed on ships powered by nuclear power plants? 0. So I think that as we look at the different technologies, I think that's one of the more viable options, getting away from the chemical equation and having thrusties go out the tail end. I'm thinking that the American people as a whole are going to be much more like the French and start to embrace nuclear power on the ground and also in space.
That'd be great.
Naveen?
Yes. Just to, talk about power plants, as you mentioned, that I have been on 3 of them in the USS carriers, and they're all nuclear power, and they're all run by the nuclear power plants. So we have been building nuclear power plant for a very long time, and we continue to build them, and they are extremely safe. We just got to get the Navy guys to run them.
Okay. Those great uniforms they had. Yeah, that's true.
But as Peter pointed out, next 5 years, first of all, is, there's going to be so much. It's very hard for us to even know what's going to happen. These are the kind of things, once we get the first step, we don't know what the second, third, and fourth, and fifth step is going to be. Because the human mind is, once they see what is possible is today versus what's going to be possible, what they will think from 2 or 3 years from now is going to be very, very different. But there is no two ways about it. We will have the suborbital flight for under 200K, and Virgin Galactic will fly. And I believe those flights will come down where you'll have millions of people flying at maybe $10,000, $25,000 cost, which could be a decent vacation spot if you could go spend 2 weeks up in the space somewhere and spend 25K. It's no different than going to Hawaii, I suppose.
Bob?
In 5 years, we'll have a world so dramatically different from the one we have today. If you think 5 years ago and think 5 years ahead, that's not it. It's 10 times that. Yeah. We will be looking back 5 years from now on the seminal events of the IPOs of the SpaceXs of the world and thinking back, my gosh, we're living in a brand new world. There'll be a market capitalization out there for private commercial space that will completely be a game changer that will help enable us to go further and faster. And the smaller entrepreneurial companies will be coming in the wake of all of that and being able to find much friendlier markets and capitalization. And this will be an entire new world 5 years from now, and I'm really looking forward to being part of it.
Question and answer, Karen?
Yes.
Great. Hi, Peter, this is for you. You mentioned, well, we know about the Antares Space Prize. You mentioned a little bit about the Google Prize. Are there other space-oriented X Prizes going on?
So thank you, Dan. Dan's one of our early New Spirit of St. Louis benefactors at X Prize. We are looking at a number of X Prizes in the space arena. One of them, for example, that I'm very excited about would be a fundamental change in launch technology. We call it the Beam Power Launch X Prize. So the notion is that I'm interested in getting space on the exponential growth curve as well. If you look at the cost of going to space for the last 40 years, it's been flat or going up as labor costs have gone up. So how do you change it? Not by a little bit. Elon is doing a good job of reducing it by a factor of 2 or 3. How do you reduce it by a factor of 50 or 100? And so we are looking at a $1 million X challenge and a $10 million prize, and I've got a benefactor I'm talking to right now about this, imagine you have either microwave phased array antennas or solid state lasers on the ground, and your vehicle is a receiving antenna that receives the energy, and it heats up hydrogen as a working fluid, and that working fluid then comes out, and you go on up. You get, instead of a mass fraction of 3% payload, 97% vehicle fuel, you can get 25% payload and 75% fuel. And you get ISPs, which is a unit of efficiency of your propulsion, instead of 350 or 400 of over 1,000. It basically would bring your performance down by a factor of 50, performance up by 50, a factor of 50 to 100. So we're looking at an X Prize for the first team that demonstrates that. And I'm working right now with Air Force, DARPA, and Navy to do a demonstration program. I think it's technologically feasible today. It would be a fundamental state change, like going from propellers to jet engines.
Well, on that, how about space elevators?
I'm not a big fan of space elevators. I think you know, the 100 gigapascal tensile strength of materials you can get there, but the complexity of actually having to build that structure and the building it and so forth, I think it's, you know, Arthur C. Clarke, a friend and a mentor, had it in science fiction, and I think for a while it's going to stay there.
Hi, my name is Christina Sally, and I'm a grad student at Stanford. So thinking back 5 years, I had high hopes that we would accomplish a lot more with commercial spaceflight by now. You know, I thought that by now there'd be several companies offering suborbital flights. And for example, if I look at the SpaceX website, the last time I checked, they still had a launch date for 2009 for the Falcon 9. So some of you said that you believe that in the next 5 years, a lot more is going to happen. So I'm wondering, you know, what is going to change, and how is this going to happen? Maybe in a little bit more detail.
Well, it's kind of an exponential thing. We're at the early stage of a line that's going to go like this, and it looks like nothing's happening right now. But just be patient, persistent. You know, we're going to be seeing SpaceX launching very, very soon, hopefully successfully. But in the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see a lot more entrepreneurial companies come online, and all of a sudden it's going to be popcorn. You know, so it's going to happen.
You know, Bob said something very important, which is the first private company to do an IPO in the purely commercial space arena. I think that could be a Netscape-like event. Remember, when Netscape went public, as one of the early first .com companies, you know, to go public, people said, "Wow, I can make money there," and capital started flowing in, and it opened up the markets to that. So if you have one of the companies do a public offering, you do have a lot of companies you don't hear about. You know, Blue Origin with Jeff Bezos, who's backed it with huge amounts of capital, and they're just staying stealth right now. You got folks like John Carmack, who's doing some amazing things. In 2 days, we're debuting the Rocket Racing League. You know, Rocket Racing, one of the companies I serve as chairman of, you know, NASCAR and Formula are $5 billion operations, and we're hopefully going to be following in their footsteps. Stay tuned. We're doing a webcast on Saturday of the first multi-aircraft race. So there's a lot on the table and a lot of capital that will be spent. So, you know, we could be wrong. Maybe it's 10 years off. But there's so much wealth to be made out there. And the other thing which has changed right now is the new presidential plan. There's $6 billion being invested in commercial operations and core technologies. That's a big change, too.
Let me make a stab at this, because there has traditionally been a disproportionate gap in expectations and desires of those that want to see this industry develop from the reality of those actually bending metal and trying to make it happen. And what's happening is that this gap is narrowing, and people are learning how to do it. As Bob said earlier, it is hard, it is costly. People have gone through learning skills, they're raising money, X-Corp has raised money. The suborbital industry has come up with really good plans to do suborbital research for secondary income streams on their payloads to help bring in multiple streams of income. This would not have been something that anybody thought about 3 years ago or 2 years ago even. So I think the expectation gap, which has been way out here, and the reality gap, which has been way over here, they're coming together. And I fully expect within a couple of years, we'll see revenues being generated out of a lot of this market that today are still just potential and futuristic. The learning curve is getting shorter and shorter, and there are really bright, competent people working the problems.
I want to say thanks because the last two guys just really led into my question. If there's going to be an SCAP-like event, and if there's going to be a huge ROI, I'd like the panel to tell us if you had to pick one thing to do first, assuming the payload technology and getting off Earth orbit is getting there, where would you go to make the most money? Being this close to Sand Hill Road, how do I get a slideshow going?
Well, first of all, from that perspective, taking the example of the internet, almost 90% of the companies that will come up in that boom will go under, right? So there is a good chance, that 90% chance you're going to lose money in whatever you invest. And they're going to be 10% of the time you're going to make lots and lots of money. So that, again, the first set of companies that are going to make most amount of money are going to be exactly the same thing almost in every revolution. Is going to be the companies that provide the tools and the services, the shovels, right? So the picks and the shovels, those are the companies that are going to be selling it to billions of companies that venture capitalists are going to fund. 90% are going to go under, but all that money you can make by providing them tools and services. So the first thing you'll do is invest in shovels and picks companies and hope and let them take all the money from different venture capitalists and make money.
Let me give you a thought that I got with Mark Millis. Many of you may know who he is. He ran the NASA Breakthrough Propulsion Project until it was canceled, and he deals with really far, far, far out physics. And they don't try to pick winners in their group. It's called Tau Zero, because they can't pick winners. So what do they look at? They look in places, and boy, this sounds like, Peter could have said this. They look in places where nobody else is looking, and they look for solutions and answers on an incremental basis to what their ultimate question might be, but they know they can't get to that ultimate question today, but they know they have a chance of getting to this incremental and that incremental question. And then they pick really, really good people on their far out physics teams from all around the world to join with them in these kind of projects. And the winners will emerge incrementally over time. I would suggest you not try to pick a winner, but you really go after the teams. You really understand the physics and the engineering that's involved in what we've been talking about today. And you look where nobody else is looking. And you look for bread and butter things that will fuel the next level of development, the infrastructure, that which is needed. But boy, I think if you try to, in 2010, pick a winner, I think you're liable to, the odds are that you pick one of the 90% that he's talking about that takes a powder.
Let me give an example of something fun.
Question? Let's just narrow it down. Mineral extraction, material science, energy, which ones get hit first?
So I think that the long-term biggest opportunity is resource extraction. But I agree with what Naveen said about the picks and shovels. So let me tell you two picks and shovels that, for example, this summer at Singularity University, the students are going to be studying. So the graduate students, top around the world, 30-odd countries come together and they focus on a number of big areas. One of them, because we're home at NASA Ames, is on space. And the two areas, for example, this summer they're working on, which I'm extraordinarily excited about, is how do you use exponentially growing technologies to reinvent exploration nanosats, where instead of having $300, $500 million satellites that weigh thousands of pounds, tonnage going out, how do you do that in something that costs a few $100,000 and weighs a few tens of kilograms? Because literally we're fundamentally changing. So that's one area. Okay, how do you shrink things by a factor of 1,000? The other area is engineering biological systems. So how do you use biology engineered for deep space to go and eat an asteroid and spit out water, oxygen, hydrogen, certain metals. So those are the sort of things we're focusing on this summer that are huge payoffs, that are picks and shovels that would change space fundamentally.
Keith Powers. Actually, I'm glad you brought up the team projects in the summer. How can people here get involved with those team projects? It's based at NASA, and so if we wanted to volunteer time or other ways, how would we get involved?
Bob, you want to take that?
Well, absolutely. Well, first of all, you would get in touch with us at singularityU.org. But we also have lots of receptors for advisory capacities, and we're also lively looking for people to help us get the students here. So, Peter?
I will mention on the way out tonight, as you exit, there's a Singularity University reception room. If you want to come and see the students who are coming and learn about the program, please stop on your way out. That room will be open. But we run executive programs, which are 4-day and 9-day executive programs for CEOs, CXO level people to come and get what we offer in 10 weeks, really compressed in 4 days. So you understand what's in the lab today, what's going to be in the lab in 5 years, what's coming to market in 10 years. Because frankly, we're living in such a disruptive environment, and billion-dollar companies are going out of business overnight, and billion-dollar companies are coming out of nowhere because of these exponential technologies. So we've tried to bring that in to teach the students, but also to bring it to Silicon Valley companies. So come on by and stop by afterwards as you're leaving and learn more about SU. Thanks.
You actually got into a little bit of this, but you know, we are running into some resource constraints, and you mentioned rare earths and other materials. So I'm very interested. How soon do you think we might see asteroid mining or things of that sort? You know, or if you will, resource acquisition for terrestrial or non-terrestrial use.
Well, I think the next, Peter would tell you that it's next 5 to 10 years is definitely going to happen. And there are going to be companies out there who will make it happen in the next 5 to 10 years. So we're not looking at more than a decade out here.
I think it's fascinating that the president set asteroids as a goal. I think at least one individual I know in this room had something to do with it. And it's incredible for both planetary protection and for resource. There's a concept called one planet living that people may have heard about. The notion is that we should all take the resources on Earth and divide it by the number of people on Earth, and that's the amount of resources you get. Well, that's great if you're living in sub-Saharan Africa because you get a lot more. But if you're living here in Silicon Valley, it means your showers last 30 seconds. You know, you get 1/10 the food you normally eat, and it sucks. And if you go to oneplanetliving.org, the website, it will tell you to sustain the level of living of the average North American, we need 5 planet Earths. And so that's ridiculous. We can't have 5 planet Earths, so we should shut down. And well, that's a very myopic, that's Club of Rome thinking from the 1960s. The fact of the matter is we can get extra resources. The Earth is a crumb in a supermarket filled with resources. We need to change that perspective.
Well, that's part of it, and part of it is we can use the exponential technology that Peter is talking about just to make the things more productive even on Earth.
Yep.
So if you can take the same amount of land to produce 100 times more food, the same amount of the things that essentially takes an ounce of platinum to be able to do it 1/100th of that. So the point is the technology, whether it's nanotechnology and bioinformatics that Peter is talking about, all of that is going to fundamentally change. And I think Peter and I have talked about it a long time. There's going to be abundance of everything, abundance of resources, the abundance of food, the abundance of energy, and we won't even know what to do with it.
Now what?
Hi, I'm Glenn Stearns, Green Tech Advocacy Films, and as much as I'd like to ask questions about green spacecraft and green space applications, I'll make it personal. I'm a space buff, and through creativity and not cost, I've been able to get mementos from space that I can hold in my office and I feel connected off-world. You're an august panel. What do you think in the future will be the most creative and least costly way all of us in this room can stay connected like that with space or off-world?
I think the space missions of the future you'll be completely immersed in through telepresence So it's not just a passive, I got something back, but you're actively involved and you're participating. So we'll be able to send messages to the future and archive ourselves. We can back ourselves up, our families, our plants, our dogs, or whatever you want to do. So it'll be a participatory world of the future where kids will not just be reading things in textbooks about space, but they'll be doing space because they'll be part of the mission. So I think it's a and technology is going to enable that.
And we're going to become immortal, right, Peter? We will never die. I mean, once we figure out our genes and everybody knows exactly what genes cause wrinkles and what makes us age, we will never die. We'll be immortal forever. So you don't even have to move yourself forward. You'll still be here.
Bert Rutan and I used to always have an argument about which would happen first, a breakthrough in propulsion or a breakthrough in longevity to get us out into the space frontier.
Hi, Shannon McElroy. This is kind of a question back to Earth. And I'm wondering, given the mission of the X Prize, do you also invest in exploring the oceans, given that it's 2/3 of our planet is water and the highest percentage of life on Earth is actually in the oceans? So for instance, Hawk's Ocean Technologies, the flying submarines, any investment in that area?
So we conduct X Prize work in 4 areas. Exploration, which is space and underwater, and I'll come back to that in a moment, energy and environment, life sciences, and education and global development. And I'll just take a moment to acknowledge Naveen. Naveen is the co-chair and one of our major benefactors in our education and global development X Prize area and helping us underwrite, develop, and fund X Prizes and X Challenges for the developing world. In the oceans arena, Eric Schmidt's underwritten us to do some work, and we've been looking at X Prizes in oceans in 4 areas. Basically, the development of human deep submersibles to go down to the ocean floor, all 10.9 kilometers the way down in a reusable, repeatable sub. We're doing the design work for a potential prize. Mapping the ocean floor. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do the ocean floor. Basically, mapping the column of the oceans from a whole bunch of data, and then ocean plastics. Can we develop a new ocean biodegradable plastic water bottle? So we're looking at those areas right now in ocean work. So it's not funded yet, but we're thinking and doing the research in that area.
Hi, this is Chetan Patwardhan. I have 2 questions, really, 2 sides of a coin. So on one hand, how do you address the shackles and the hurdles put up by governments when it comes to looking at technologies, approving them? I mean, you said, FAA took 9 years to approve something. And basically, the country that really allows for that, to be fast-paced, could be Russia, could be China, could be India, or could be countries in Africa. And versus Uncle Sam here, who will be basically saying no to many things. And don't you guys see that as a big hindrance as you dream? Because for every single thing that you want to do, the government puts shackles on your ankles. The other side of the coin is, what are we doing as a government or as NASA to actually incubate some of these technologies and then partake in the commercialization of it and really lending the NASA expertise to all these budding entrepreneurs and companies?
I think the president's plan in that sense is very, very good. I mean, it's essentially saying NASA to do the fundamental research that private companies just will not spend time and energy on. So NASA will do what NASA does best, which is fundamental R&D for a very long term. And the private companies will do what they do best, which is take existing technologies that are there today or what they're going to be there in 2 years and 3 years from now and start doing the work expecting the technology to be there, which will be there. So essentially, in some sense, it's going to be a mix of a good private-public partnership.
And if I understood the first part of your point correctly, the challenges are not just technological, they're political, regulatory, and some of the biggest challenges we in the commercial space face are there is no regulatory framework or there's nobody to ask. Or if you make the mistake of asking, sometimes you get the answer you don't want to get. So the exploration missions that the private sector will be involved in at the early stages, and Peter alluded to this earlier, will be setting the precedents, very, very important case law precedents for that which will be setting the case for the future. So who owns the moon? Well, we don't know yet, right? We certainly have the international frameworks that say we can't claim sovereignty. We, the states, can't claim sovereignty, but that there's no exclusion of commercial operators beneficiating resources. The governments have done it. The governments have brought back rocks and claimed title. So the resources of space are open to beneficiation, and the question of land title is not necessarily part of that, but it's a very important regulatory framework that wait till the debate begins when the first private spacecraft lands on another interplanetary body. That will be an interesting debate.
You know, through about the 1970s, the defense expenditure in the United States was about 40% of the budget, and social services, Medicare, Social Security, et cetera, Medicaid, was about 20%. Today, those numbers are reversed. It didn't just happen. It wasn't just lawmakers. It's public opinion. It's what the public wants. If you want to see things advance, you have to sell it on the public. I would say one of NASA's biggest failings is NASA has just never really captured the imagination and the excitement of the general public. You have a movie that comes out, Apollo 13, everyone gets all excited about it, and they just can't seem to hitch the bandwagon on and carry on with that excitement. So if you want to see space move ahead, you convince Oprah that space is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Seriously. You get America excited about space, and by God, people will stop saying, well, no, we're spending too much on space. They'll be saying, well, we're spending more on potato chips, we're spending more on pizza, or gosh, we're spending less than a penny of our tax dollar. Why aren't we spending more? But until you get the average American excited about it, like they are about the NFL or NASCAR or et cetera, until you generate that kind of widespread excitement, I really don't think you can have the grassroots effort to get the funding and the effort, and the youth being excited and saying, yeah, that's what I want to do. I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to work on the space program. I want to be part of going to Mars.
So I'll answer in very briefly in saying, first of all, it's potentially a new day in the space arena. And we have, for the first time, a set of leadership in NASA and a presidential support for a vision that is, I guess I would call it the entrepreneur's wet dream in the space arena. So that's potentially, it hasn't passed yet, it still has to get through Congress, but if it does, it's a phenomenal set of opportunities. I hope that's not the quote that ends up from tonight.
You can pretty much guarantee.
Who's Twittered that already?
Yeah. So we also have Twitter's lighting up. We also have NASA a CTO for the first time in NASA, who is someone who's got a great vision, working with folks like Pete and Lori Garver and Charlie Bolden. And we have prizes going on in NASA as well to take levels of risk. We're always going to have to support the industrial base, but I think there's a chance now to really support the entrepreneurial base as well.
What about an extra prize to get Oprah interested?
Good
One
point.
more question? One more question.
Yes. $1 billion sounds like a lot of money to do a launch. Are there any concrete funded plans right now to do a launch? And can it be a lot less expensive than that right now?
I'm sorry, say that again, $1 billion?
Yeah, I heard earlier you were talking about $1 billion to do a
shuttle. My point was that the space shuttle annual budget's on the order of $4.5 billion a year, and when they do they do 4 launches in a year, you divide the total budget by the number of launches, and you get a rough number.
Got it. So that seems like a lot of money for a startup to be spending on it.
It's not what the startups will charge. SpaceX, which will launch a 7-person crew on the Dragon, will be about $90 million a flight. Divide that by 7, and it's about $15 million a seat.
Is that funded and ready to go?
It is a company that is funded and is launching their vehicle for the first time with a mock-up capsule in 30 days.
Great. Are there other plans as well? Do you know?
There are other plans. You have folks like Jeff Bezos committing huge amounts of wealth. and other players I can't speak about who are committing large amounts of money. And then you have Orbital Sciences and Lockheed and Boeing and a lot of the incumbents that are looking to put forward solutions as well.
I want to thank all of you for attending, and I certainly want to thank the panel members here. It's been informative for me, and I'm sure for everybody else. And it's really energizing to hear each of you speak. It's like getting a new blood transfusion every time I come into this arena and I hear Peter and Bob, and this has been a real opportunity for me to meet Naveen and Bill. And you know, people look up, because that is really the path to a better life here on Earth, as well as all of what we've talked about. It's where our future is and will be for our kids, our grandkids. And if we don't seize the moment, we're all going to be losers. I mean, there's no other way to talk about it. It's costly, it's hard, it's time-consuming. We're making great progress. And seriously, spend some time looking up, and it'll really change your outlook. And if you hear things about space and it doesn't sound right or you don't understand it, get a hold of somebody who knows something about it and ask them. And don't just take for granted what you hear, because often it has nothing to do with reality. And again, thank you to the panel, and thank you to all of you, and to the club and Karen. I appreciate it.
Don't be losers, look up. I want to really thank our speakers and David for delivering a very interesting conversation that I hope has just begun. And we have some out-of-this-world Churchill Club t-shirts as a symbol of our thanks. Thanks again also to Intelius. And of course, thanks to all of you for coming. Have a good rest of the evening and drive safely. Thanks.
Thank you.